Appreciate it. So,
No worries.
how's the band going? You guys been hitting the road at all this year?
Yeah. We've just been doing a lot of European sort of one-offs, weekenders, because obviously it's close, the mainland, the continent. So just been doing that, couple of US things, and that been mainly sticking to there really because it's been the easiest to do since the COVID situation.
Mm.
Those places have picked up quite a bit. It's been a bit trickier going further than that, because there was still quite a lot of restrictions, in some places. So
Yeah.
everything's now starting to, you know, sort of normalize, I suppose, a little bit. But yeah.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of different things that's happening over in Europe and stuff, especially with the costs and things like that. Have you guys been sort of noticing a massive difference between post-COVID and pre-COVID stuff?
With the costs, did you say
Well,
earlier?
just in general, just the way the touring's working these days and
Yeah.
stuff.
I mean, mate, the costs, it's funny. I mean, you sort of, that's definitely the appropriate word to use because the cost now of things like vans, hiring vans and all the associated sort of bills, of
Mm.
it's skyrocketed. It really is expensive right now.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky one, but what we're going to do, we're an active band, we got stuff to do, and so you kind of got to get on with it a little bit, and try and make the best, and you know squeeze a few things here and there so you can, afford to do what you need to do.
Yeah, definitely. Well, obviously, in a few weeks or next month, obviously, well, September, I think it is. You're coming back to Australia, which is great to see. It's been a while. I think the last time you were here might have been 2017, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, it was a 2016 maybe.
Okay, yeah,
It could
and
be 17.
yeah,
Excuse
something
me.
like that. Yeah, either
Yeah,
way,
yeah.
it's been a while. But I remember though, and you probably won't remember this, but the last time that we actually spoke was 2020, and it was sort of like in the middle of the pandemic and stuff like that. And there was talks of at the time about how the touring was going to be sort of affected and all that stuff. And obviously a very strange time. But since that time, and you've obviously hit the road again and all that stuff. Has it been a great sort of feeling to sort of be back on stage again after all that stuff that's happened over the last few years?
I mean, it did feel quite strange when we went back. The first gig we did, which was in the June a couple of years ago,
Mm.
um, I was all over the place, if I'm honest, because I get stage fright anyway. I've always had it. I can never get rid of it. It's just there with me
Okay.
permanently. And I was like, fucking hell, I was like, it was like the floor was like superheated or something. I was
Hmm.
almost like dancing around, before the gigs. I was so nervous.
Yeah.
And then once we got back into the swing of it, then it was all right. But yeah, so it did feel strange, when we went back to gigging. But you know, there was always going to come a point when it was going to be okay to do that again. So, and ever since once we got that first gig under our belts, to be fair, then it just kind of seemed to all, click back into gear. So.
Yeah. Well, as I said, it's good to see you back here, coming back to Australia. I'd like to sort of go back a little bit in time, with the sort of previous history with Napalm Death in Australia, because obviously you've had such a great history with the country. You've been here many times. Do you remember, for yourself personally, the very first time you came here to play with Napalm Death?
Kind of. I remember there was actually a riot, um, and the police came to shut. I can't remember exactly what happened, so I'm
Yeah.
just kind of trying to remember details a little bit. But I believe the police were like provoking the kids, and the kids just were not having any of it, and they just were throwing cans at the police, and it was funny because it's VB and it Victoria Bitter.
Yes.
Um, there was just cans of that. There was like hundreds of cans of that all over the floor where they just thrown them at the police.
Yeah.
And that kind of sticks out in my mind. The gig itself, I couldn't even tell you. I don't even remember. you know.
Yeah.
But so it was an interesting start point.
What about sort of since that time? Like what's been some of the highlights for you personally in Australia?
um, I mean, we've just, I guess, going across the country, really. You know, it's
Mm.
been um, some of the places I'd only ever seen in pictures, you know, or whatever.
Yeah,
Um, you know, going to Perth, you know, which is the most isolated city in Australia. You wouldn't
that's
think
where
it
I
if
am
you
as
were
well.
there. Oh, you're in Perth, are
I'm
you?
in
Yeah.
Perth. Yeah.
Yeah. So I spent quite a bit of time in Perth because my ex-girlfriend is from Perth, you know, lives in
Okay.
Perth. So I had a really good time there, you know.
Mm.
It's a really interesting place, but it's hard to appreciate that it is the most isolated city in Australia,
Yeah.
basically, purely by geography. So yeah, that was always really good. Um, Love like Brisbane, you know, the coastal areas and
Mm.
all the rest of it, and Melbourne because it's such a vibrant city. You know,
Yeah.
a lot of history with music, especially like hardcore punk and stuff, which is where
Hmm.
my kind of interests lie. Um, so yeah, yeah, always had a really good time in Australia. Um, yeah, I mean, Australia's got its issues under the surface, like a lot of places. I think, you know,
Yeah, of course.
I think, you know, just as a personal observation, you know, I think the situation with Indigenous peoples has to
Mm.
improve. You know, I
Hmm.
just don't think that's far enough down the line. I
Yeah.
think it could be, and it isn't, and it needs to be, and it should be. You know, and you know the way immigrants are treated in Australia, or those that are fleeing from other places, I think to me is it's just not right. You know, I'm
Mm.
sorry, that's the only way I could put it. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
we have a similar situation in the UK right now, actually. You know, and it's I find it inhumane, if I'm honest. You know, it kind of it sort of says to me, oh, you know, is this the actions of fellow human beings? It just kind of doesn't make sense in a lot of respects, you know. But
Yeah.
there you go, you know, that's my observation. So, but yeah, you know, on other levels, I got a lot of dear friends in Australia, and I'm really looking forward to coming down, you know. So.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like I said, you've been down here quite a few times over the years. With people who have sort of had the luxury of sort of coming to a country multiple times, and they sometimes find a routine or they find a thing that they love to go to every time they go to that place. Is there something for you in Australia that you always sort of have to go and check out or be out or whatever?
Well, mate, well, I mean, I've got it on. You're going to laugh when I tell you this, but you know, mate, I've been. This is going to sound really ludicrous, and so it's going to make people laugh, but you know, obviously, I've followed Australian soaps down the years. I still watch them now.
Hmm.
Neighbours is gone, but it's coming back. You know, Home and Away is still going. Still watch it, and I really want to go to the set. I know that sounds really ludicrous, you
That's all
know, but
right.
I've been leaning on the guys that promote us in Australia,
Hmm.
um, and I want to really go and visit the set. You know,
Yeah.
I'm serious. I'm not joking. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
so I'm gonna have a look at that while I'm down there. You know, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that's an interesting one because I mean, obviously, a lot of those Aussie soap operas are quite popular in the UK and have been for many years.
yeah,
But obviously, at the same time, there's a lot of British soap operas that have sort of been at the same time, being popular here as well. But obviously, we have a sort of strong connection between the two places, the UK and Australia and stuff like that.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
what do you find is the biggest similarity between us as far as like? Well, I guess from a musical standpoint, and as far as like how fans interact with like when you play a gig, like what's the biggest similarity?
To be honest, mate, I couldn't make a distinction. I think music is universal,
Mm.
and gig situations are generally universal. I always find it quite odd, and I've attempted to answer it down the years, even though I felt it was quite an odd concept or question. I I can't differentiate between someone that might go to a gig in the UK, someone that might go to a gig in Australia, somebody
Mm.
that might go to a gig in Japan, somebody that might go to a gig in Romania. You know,
Hmm.
people, music is universal, and I think although we have different reactions to music as individuals, I think the general receptiveness to music is universal. I honestly can't make a distinction, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wouldn't expect anything different when I come to Australia, but that's not a negative.
Yeah, of course.
That's pretty neutral. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah. I understand what you mean. It can be a difficult thing, I suppose, to sort of have that perspective of like different audiences and stuff, because the nature of your music is quite extreme. I mean, when you talk about like heavy music, and especially in the punk and hardcore world, I mean, what you guys do is pretty much at the top of what things could be as extreme as. Um, so that's why I always wonder, like, how do people sort of respond to that? Because and the reason why I'm asking is because it's based on an article that I recently read about the sort of the birthplace of grindcore, like way back in the day. And it was a very
it's funny
interesting
you should
story.
mention that. Yeah, it's funny you should mention that because I've had a couple of people mention that to me in this sort of raft of interviews today,
Mm.
and I would have never have thought it. How that sort of article, which it comes from a really big newspaper in the UK, but it would be it would be quite submerged
Mm.
amongst other stories, So I just think it's really interesting that people have seen that. But I will say, as articles go, and it's in a major publication, it's a really well written article.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't just mention the surface stuff, and it's not like a ha ha look at these stupid punk rockers and their sort of anarchist fantasies. It doesn't do any of that. It really goes under the surface of what it was at the time in quite a comparatively short article.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an interesting insight into what was. I mean, we're talking about, well, where are we now? Sort of 86, 87. What was that? That was 13, um, 33, 36, 37, nearly 40 years ago
Yeah.
now. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I like to think as Napalm, we've carried that spirit on from the things that the references you can read in that article.
Mm.
That's all we can do. That's all I'm interested in doing. I'm not interested in shaping Napalm Death to be something that necessarily the commercial world desires, or to fit demographics, which I think are a bit nonsensical anyway.
Yeah.
I just all I want to do in Napalm is put the best music and ideas that we can, make it multifaceted, interesting, hopefully, and that's all you can do. Above and beyond that, there's not really much else for me to say.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and what a career that Napalm Death has had as well, and especially with, as I said, the nature of the music to have that sort of longevity is it's quite a feat. I think it surprised a lot of people, to be honest.
So the thing is, though, Andrew, the reason that I would say, my humble opinion, the reason that we're still around today is because I've never considered it a career. I
Okay.
never went into this thinking of it as as a career.
Mm.
It's perhaps you could argue it's a vocation, maybe, at a push, but I never looked at it in terms of building my profile,
Yeah.
as a place of work or anything like that. It was for me. It was, first of all, I was fortunate to be in the right place and the right time, 100%.
Mm.
And thereafter, just tried to do the best that I could, and satisfy ourselves artistically, and that's really it. I never looked at it tactically, from a career point of view. It was never that way for me.
Yeah. Oh, well, whatever you guys have done, it's been absolutely amazing. So I know I've been a long time fan since, well, probably way back in the early 90s, I guess. I guess it was the first time I discovered you. So it's been amazing to see the sort of like the trajectory that you guys have made. So do you have any last words at all for the Aussie fans before you come down here?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for the support, I guess, is the obvious one, because it Australia is so disconnected from many other places,
Mm.
and I know it's really tough. and I know it's really tough for Australian bands actually to get out of Australia
Yeah.
and out into the wider world, and people don't have to support bands from thousands of miles away. They probably got better things to do with their time, at points. So yeah, I mean, it really it's a privilege to to not visit a place for several years at a time, but still be able to go back, and there's still a throng of people
Mhm.
that are willing to come and watch you play and listen to your ideas and listen to your music. I mean, it's a privilege.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it. And I guess we will see you in September.
No worries, Andrew.